Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News in collaboration with Behind the Headlines, where, you know, we round up the insanity of the weekend and analyze what it means and why it's happening. I'm your host, Greg Stoker, former U.S. Army Ranger turned activist journalist, and I'm happy to announce that we are back to a once-a-week Monday show until January, where we will pick up at the Monday-Thursday schedule again. It has to do with funding issues. So if you are inclined to help out a non-corporate independent newsroom, check out the Mint Press News Patreon. And if you're getting nickeled and dimed in the hellscape of late-stage finance capitalism, well, we're just glad you're here. And if you could like, share, and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. So, everybody, it is November 17th, Monday. Welcome back to the Salt Mines. And this weekend has been insane. The whole Trump Epstein association in the context of the White House not wanting to release the files is now a full-blown, maybe the wrong word here, scandal. Megyn Kelly said that 15-year-old girls, children are women now, and at least Epstein didn't prey upon 8-year-olds. Fox News has instantly begun normalizing that idea because, that's what their editorial board believes in the first place from earlier this weekend. Who really wants to leave the country? Women, 15 to 44. Men, 15 to 44. And they're citing the Gallup poll. And I actually did look at the Gallup poll. And yeah, it's really bizarre that they have an age group of 15 to 44. I don't think I've seen that before. But anyways, we're just going to move right on because that is not, there's just too much to cover. Like, this weekend has been freaking crazy. But everyone is talking about the Epstein drama and how now that Trump and his team have spent the weekend hunkered down in the White House trying to swing votes against releasing the files and flip their position, calling for them to now actually be released, having realized that they can't get the GOP to toe the line on this issue. We are still sleepwalking our way into interventions in Mexico and most urgently in Venezuela. So let's check in with CBS and the neoliberal media to see how they aren't really against it and are remaining objective, giving both sides remaining objective, just like they did during the Iraq War. Okay.
The largest aircraft carrier, the nuclear-powered Gerald R. Ford, is now in the Caribbean within striking distance of Venezuela. CBS News' Charlie D'Agata is in Puerto Rico watching the U.S. military buildup and his new comments from President Trump on the U.S. and Venezuela. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning, Vlad. We're at the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station. You probably haven't heard of it because it's been shut down since 2004, but not anymore. In that direction, F-35 fighter jets. They don't want us showing them for obvious security reasons, but all part of this massive military buildup here. President Trump weighed in last night on possible next steps in Venezuela.
We may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out. They would like to talk.
It's unclear what those discussions could include, as the Trump administration plans to designate Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization and associate it with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. This comes as the Pentagon announces yet another boat strike Saturday, killing 3 people. And the weekend arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's most advanced warship, marks a sharp escalation.
So we just landed in...
Yeah, so the Gerald R. Ford can carry about 90 fighter craft, which is, almost twice. Wait, Venezuela has 30 active fighter craft, and the U.S. the Gerald R. Ford has 4 F-18 squadrons of Super Hornets. So, just that one aircraft carrier is going to be bigger than Venezuela's whole Air Force. And we'll get into what that means here in a bit.
Croy, and we found something unexpected on the runway here. 2 U.S. military transport planes.
A powerful addition to the heavy firepower in this region we've witnessed ourselves.
It's completely surreal.
Those planes have caught the attention of resident Tony Lance, too.
These huge planes.
I think it's funny how the neoliberal media will, talked to an expat. Well, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but essentially an expat business owner in Puerto Rico about how she feels uncomfortable, but never will they ever deign to speak to one of the people actually born there. I just thought that was an interesting thing to point out.
We're coming in and going and coming and going.
Military planes.
Yes, what's that all about?
Adding to the uncertainty,
That is the USS Lake Erie. It's a guided missile cruiser. It arrived here a few days ago.
monitoring the buildup here closely is Samuel Saines, a Navy veteran and a government administrator in St. Croix.
Does it change the temperature here if there are airstrikes in Venezuela?
Yes, we are a little bit nervous for the most part. We are watching the news on a daily basis.
So as far as the Trump administration is concerned, this is still a drug interdiction mission called Operation Southern Spear. But with all this military hardware in the neighborhood, there are plenty of options to expand that operation.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for that completely milquetoast objective, whatever the hell I just witnessed. Yeah, I like how they don't talk to any like activists or organizers or journalists. They just talk to a business owner and a Navy vet. That's it. About what the sentiment is. Just get real objective. Don't really want any opinions about this, because, our editorial board doesn't necessarily oppose an interventionist war in Venezuela. But, it's called Operation Southern Spear. Other operations that Pete Hegseth has named have been Operation Midnight Hammer against Iranian hard sites earlier this year, and Operation Rough Rider. And I was like, are you trying to complete Judas Priest's final studio album with, Southern Spear, Midnight Hammer, and Rough Rider? I don't know what's going on in the Pentagon, but I will say that what the global North has allowed Israel to do in Gaza has normalized impunity in modern warfare forever. So let's talk about the Department of War's announcement of Operation Southern Sphere. So every time I say the Department of War, it's going to be like that because I've just decided that's how we're going to do it. Last week, Secretary of War with no Ranger tab, Pete Hegseth, posted, led by Joint Task Force Southern Spear and SOUTHCOM Southern Command. This mission defends our homeland, removes narco-terrorists from our hemisphere, and secures our homeland from the drugs that are killing our people. The Western Hemisphere is America's neighborhood, and we will protect it. So this is the Imperial Monroe Doctrine 2.0. The American continent is our playground. Foreign actors beware, and state governments better get in line. And when the U.S. publicly names an operation like Operation Southern Spear, it's either like a high intensity short operation, or it generally means that that operation is going to last for years. The last named operation that was launched was Operation Prosperity Guardian. That name is obviously too on the nose. In December of 2023 against the Houthis, defending commerce and freedom of navigation and ensuring trade lanes are open. And had nothing, of course, sarcasm here, to do with Israel. Israel. It's November 2025, and Operation Prosperity Guardian is still ongoing. So, sorry, it's an evolving operation. It looks like we're really actually going to go for this Venezuela war, like for real, though the scope of it remains to be seen. I still think it will only be like a distance conflict at most, with regime change operations and maybe decapitation strikes with special operations teams. But it's just the amassing of assets close to what has never been amassed before since like the Iraq invasion. Of course, it's nowhere near the amount of asset allocation that the Iraq invasion entailed. There's like very few ground troops at all. There's like 4,000 Marines so far. But yeah, it could be a distance conflict like what we saw between Iran and Israel earlier this year. Was it last year? It was last year. Jeez, one catastrophe after another, But in terms of legality, and this is the main question, the Justice Department basically argues that the United States is a, quote, non-international armed conflict, or we're in one, waged under the President's Article 2 authorities. A core element in the analysis is that the strikes are permissible under domestic law. So the opinion states that cartels are selling drugs to finance a campaign of violence and extortion, thereby to create an internalized armed conflict within the United States. And Maduro is the head of the cartel. Like Khamenei in Iran, he is at the center of another octopus of terror. But the legality of these strikes is patently absurd, right? Like, if we just think about it, like these groups are businesses, right? And if they are carrying out violence in the United States, they're doing it for profit, not for the purpose of sowing terror, which is actually bad for business. And we know the strikes are illegal, and we know they've killed civilians in international waters. Otherwise, why would the DOJ publish a memo this summer asserting that service members who participate in boat strikes in the Caribbean cannot be prosecuted? Like, what? The thrust of that gem is that all strikes of the coast of Venezuelan territorial waters are consistent with the laws of armed conflict, which we totally care about, and as such are lawful orders. Keep following me. Military personnel are legally obligated to follow lawful orders, and as such are not subject to prosecution for following lawful orders. So all strikes are lawful. Soldiers can't follow orders unless they're lawful. Therefore, everything they're doing is lawful. So basically nothing to see here, folks. We're just fabricating a war so that we can get around the restrictions on lethal force during peacetime, like murder statutes. Those are so annoying and counter to profit maximization. But this consensus is not universal at all. The UN Special Rapporteur disagrees with it. Last week, CNN broke the story, quote, UK suspends some intelligence sharing with the US over boat strike concerns in a major break. So, yeah, that's like the first time this has ever happened, and it's over these Venezuelan boat strikes. I'm just actually going to pull up the article real quick because it's kind of enlightening. So, like, yeah, the United Kingdom is no longer sharing intelligence with the US about suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean because it does not want to be complicit in the U.S. military strikes and believes the attacks are illegal, sources familiar with the matter told CNN. For years, the UK, which controls a number of territories in the Caribbean, I was supposed to add this to stage, where it bases intelligence assets. So yeah, the UK, has a lot of territories still in the Caribbean, like the U.S. like in Virgin Islands and stuff like that, has helped the U.S. locate vessels suspected of carrying drugs in the past so that the U.S. Coast Guard could interdict them. That meant the ships would be stopped, boarded, its crew detained, and drugs seized, right? It was basically sent to a joint intel agency, but after, these strikes, all of that regional intelligence sharing has stopped because, they're fine. Britain's fine, like, supporting Israel unconditionally in their war crimes, but this is actually, like, too close to home for a lot of complicated reasons. Okay, so, and again, this is why it's suspected that Admiral Halsey, the commander of SOUTHCOM, and just so you guys know, here's a map right here. The world is kind of far away, but when I say SOUTHCOM, the entire world is, here, let me see if I can zoom in at all, maybe not, is put into combatant commands. So you have North America and Canada, that's NORTHCOM. You have Mexico, I think Mexico is in NORTHCOM, but you have SOUTHCOM. All the South American continent right here. That is SOUTHCOM. Then you have CENTCOM from Egypt all the way to India, and then AFRICOM, and then EUROCOM, and then INDOPACOM. So right now, SOUTHCOM is getting a lot of different assets. Sorry, I just saw someone in the comments say, "Let's not be rushing to conclusions again." So yeah, SOUTHCOM is getting a bunch of different assets right now. So I think it's going far beyond the premise of saber rattling. Like the USS Gerald R. Ford was due for refit in the United States on the East Coast. It got extended for this operation, which is insanely expensive because that means they have to go through port, and instead of docking, they have to bring on a bunch of contractors to fix everything, to run engine maintenance, and they have to store them, bring them with them, pay them overtime hours. It's just freaking crazy. So yeah, their deployment has been extended for this and may be extended for some time. But anyways, yeah. So the commander of SOUTHCOM, Admiral Halsey, just got instated earlier this year, but over the strikes, it's rumored that he is resigning about a year into a 3-year command. All right. So I don't want to, I mean, I personally wouldn't want to touch this Iraq 2.0 catastrophe either. And the consent isn't there. But MCM, Marina Corina Machado, got her little Nobel Peace Prize in a stunning display of moral laundering. And Miss CIA is ready to open Venezuela to complete privatization by Western capitalists and crush any left-wing sentiment with an iron fist, a Department of War fist. So let's talk about it. All right. So let's just talk about her whole like Nobel Peace Prize thing real quick, because it's actually kind of enlightening about like the ideology that's driving this, just like the neocon ideology that drives a senseless, ultimately self-defeating and self-destructive attack against Iran. Okay, because, all right, so the Inspira America Foundation, headed by Marcel Felipe, a Cuban-American lawyer, joined with the rectors of 4 U.S. universities on 16th August 2024 to promote the nomination of Machado for the Nobel Peace Prize, highlighting her, quote, tireless fight for peace in Venezuela and the world, unquote, as a fair recognition of a person who has dedicated almost her entire life to fight for peace and liberation of Venezuela. So in August, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a Cuban-American anti-communist ideologue, Senator Rick Scott, Floridian evangelical Zionist, and members of Congress Mario Balart, anti-Castro Cuban-American, and Maria Elvira Salazar, daughter of more Cuban exiles, supported her nomination. Okay, so on 10th October, Machado was awarded the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize for her, again, quote, tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and for her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. You know, she dedicated the prize, as you guys may remember, to the suffering of the people of Venezuela and President Trump for his decisive support of our cause, unquote. She's also called for regime change operations from Netanyahu. Okay, so what we have to understand is that this operation is entirely ideological and at whose core is enshrined the mandates of capitalism. Free markets, privatization, stolen labor and stolen resources, and the U.S. assertion of regional domination and hegemony. The Trump administration is awash with Iran hawks and their myopic obsession with regime change there. And a lot of those same hawks are on the Venezuelan ticket too. You have all these like exiles from Venezuela and Cuba all hanging out in Miami, all surrounding Trump, going to Mar-a-Lago all the time. And they're honestly determining a lot of this policy. Yeah. And so I guess what we have to understand is, again, complete ideology here, rooted in obviously capitalism. But here MCM is speaking to business leaders. And so that's what she says for the Nobel Peace Committee. But, you know, who's really running this? All wars in America are bankers' wars. So when she's actually speaking to business leaders and global thinkers at the America Business Forum in Miami, Florida, earlier this month, in her keynote, Machado reflected on Venezuela's democratic struggle, women's leadership and global change, you know, the neoliberal hire more female prison guards shtick, and the importance of rebuilding trust between citizens and institutions. And what she means by institutions is clearly corporations.
And this is amazing, super exciting for me. We will open Venezuela for foreign investment. I am talking about a $1.7 trillion opportunity, not only in oil and gas, which is huge, and you know that the opportunities, because we will open all upstream, middle stream, downstream to all companies, but also in mining, in gold, in infrastructure, power. We have our grid right now has a 17 gigawatt opportunity of of energy potential that needs to be rehabbed. Certainly for technology and AI and tourism. You know, Venezuela has 2,800 kilometers of pristine Caribbean coastline ready to be developed. So this is going to be huge. We will bring rule of law, we will open markets, we will have security for foreign investment, and a transparent, massive privatization program that is waiting for you.
That is a massive foreign investment privatization program that is waiting for you. Pick me, please. I look like something out of a nightmare that I had when I still had lucid dreams as a teenager. So, yeah, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the United States' most advanced aircraft carrier, arrived in the Caribbean Sea on Sunday, yesterday. The U.S. Navy has confirmed this amid rising tensions between the U.S. and nearby nations. It's not just Venezuela; it's Colombia, it's Nicaragua. You know, if you remember the Panama Canal incident at the beginning of Trump administration, you know, where they pressured Panama to kick out Chinese or not re-up Chinese contracts in an attempt to forestall Chinese influence through the Belt and Road Initiative in our Monroe Doctrine, America Sphere 2.0. Yeah, so it's not just Venezuela. Also, we're engaged with far-right actors in the region. We just gave $40 billion to frigging Javier Milei, the insane anarcho-capitalist who likes to put on frigging crappy rock concerts where he growls for 30-minute sets at a time. So yeah, again, yeah, nearby nations, and also we have allied far-right governments. But like days earlier, the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, whom Washington does not recognize as the country's legitimate leader, called for peace between the two nations. And this weekend, I think he sung a John Lennon song at a rally and has stayed on message about being for peace. I mean, he's very interested in his political survival, stuff like that. But yeah, he's basically said, yeah, come and take it, you know, but it doesn't matter. The U.S. is not interested in peace, and the wheels are already in motion, and MCM will be way more pliant than he ever would be. So it looks like this is happening. If you're at all confused here, just remember that the people of Venezuela yearn for a Libya regime change operation, and that the Epstein files are a democratic hoax, and that make sure you sign that 50-year mortgage, you know, because let's remind everyone why this is all happening. And look at a clip from an interview from former SOUTHCOM Commander General Laura J. Richardson, the predecessor of resigning Admiral Halsey, speak to our favorite neocon think tank, the Atlantic Council, last year. The same thing she says is echoed by MCM.
The countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, with Russia relationships. Why this region matters with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude.
Light sweet crude, baby. Drill, baby, drill for that light sweet crude. What the hell am I hearing?
Covered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well with oil, copper, gold. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have the 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too.
So when she's saying we have, she means United States Military Southern Command. That's crazy. She's using that verbiage. Wow. I watched this one time, but I don't think I caught the wheeze in there. Holy shit. Okay, that's crazy. But I guess that's how you would speak if you're on an interview with the Atlantic Council.
I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security, and we need to step up our game.
It has a lot to do with national security. You know, I was going to talk about this later, but let's just say this quote that I always hear is like, like a gotcha zinger. Like, socialism is great until you run out of other people's money, says the corporate elite talking head at CNN, who lines up every 8 years for his government bailout when his completely financialized institution goes into free fall. But we can't call that corporate socialism because that's not what it is. It's actually called national security. Every time, like, I'll get into it. I don't want to preempt this episode a little bit, but the massively overvalued OpenAI, which we're going to talk about here in a second, with active defense contracts, just like every other cloud and AI tech venture, which has made substantial spending commitments totaling over like $1.4 trillion like a year to compute resources and infrastructure through the early 2030s, but it's only bringing in like $13 billion in annual revenue. Yeah, that's a bubble. Yikes. Well, these commitments are primarily for cloud services and hardware for major tech companies like Oracle, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA, CoreWeave, and are part of a massive push to develop AI and build data centers, including the Stargate project. Bro, we got to beat China and get more access to rare earths, and also continue to dominate the petrol market. So we'll take the oil too, but like, this is the next thing. These rare earths, right? One of the main chokeholds is material constraints. And I may be getting a little bit ahead of myself here. And since getting them from the Donbass in Ukraine, remember that Lindsey Graham was going on. It's like, we don't want Russia and we don't want China getting the rare earth. Like, that's not going to happen, right? Because the Ukrainians are going to retake the Donbass. It's just not in the cards. Well, Venezuela is certainly closer and not a military near peer like Russia. This is also driven heavily by anti-communist Cuban-American neocon ideologues like Marco Rubio and Salazar, who co-signed the nomination for MCM last year. But in the end, it's all about capital, baby, full spectrum dominance. Yeah. So just like when we bombed Iran, this plan has been in place for some time. It was just a matter of finding a president who would be willing to go along with it. The Iranian strike packages were planned and rehearsed under Biden, but he didn't greenlight it. He's also a Zionist and a Russia/China hawk. But this is really stupid because there is no pretext for war, and we have actually lost intelligence support in this region from our actual greatest ally, Britain, over this. And again, the British government supports the genocide in Palestine. And there are a lot of reasons why the U.S. government and the capitalists that control it need this to happen. We can talk about oil, we can talk about regional domination, getting China out of our sphere of influence. But I just wanted to take AI in this episode because there's too many facets to this to really like drill down on what we really need Venezuela for. So we need rare earth minerals because they are essential components for a wide range of modern technologies, right? From consumer electronics and renewable energy to advanced military equipment. These minerals are like critical for manufacturing magnets and electric vehicles, wind turbines. Doesn't Trump not know how magnets work and he always brings out wind turbines? Yeah. Anyways, they're in computers, they're in smartphones, and key parts in military systems like jets, submarines, and missiles, et cetera, on and on and on and on. The U.S. relies on imports for many of these materials, making domestic access to a secure and reliable supply a national security and economic concern. This is how they think in like upper echelon defense circles. It's not just like people at like Raytheon and Tesla being like, we need the coltan, man. No, like all of these generals who grew up within the institution of the U.S. military, which supports Wall Street, ties national security into resource domination. That's how they see it. It's a complete byproduct. There's something strategic to it, but ultimately it serves capital, right? So they absolutely see this as their oath to the Constitution, their responsibility to protect American interests as securing these rare earths and the oil and promoting American exceptionalism and protecting their country. Like literally, I grew up in these circles. my grandfather was a colonel. He almost made general, but he got out in protest of the Vietnam War. My father was in the military. I grew up in the military. Like, this is literally how people think. They don't see the problem with it. It's just national security, the kind of like mythic obsession within the American mind of national security. This is part of it. This is how they think, right? The United States gets most of its rare earths from China. A lot of people don't know this, and we want for decades. Even when I got out 10 years ago of the special operations community. Even then, they're like, we need to not rely on China for anything right now. Though, the U.S. has its own domestic mines and is trying to reduce this dependence, but it's completely negligible. In recent years, China has actually supplied about 80 to 96% of U.S. rare earth imports, making the U.S. heavily reliant on China for processing capabilities. The U.S. is also a significant producer itself, but most of its raw rare earth elements must be sent to China for the crucial separation and processing steps. So even if we do some sketchy stuff, use through like really, really sketchy supply chains out of the Congo to get those rare earths here, we still have to send them to China to get processed, and then they come back because we're completely deindustrialized right now. So China dominates the global processing of rare earths, as I've said a zillion times right now. Sorry to be repetitive. Meaning that even raw materials mined in the U.S., I don't know, this dependence developed after the U.S. industry shifted to China in the mid-1980s due to high environmental costs associated with domestic mining and lower production costs in China. The tendency for the rate of profit to fall and all that jazz. And our inevitable fall into full-blown deindustrialization and finance capital. Since it's too expensive and takes too long to reindustrialize, we got to do regime change and install a right-wing comprador government who will allow us to pillage their country and exploit their people. And when finance capitalism shits the bed, which it always does, we generally have to bail it out and go to war anyway. So this whole AI thing tanks. It's not just the Epstein files, baby. So let's talk about OpenAI. All right. We spent a long time talking about like Alex Karp and Peter Thiel on this series over at Palantir, but let's do Sam Altman and OpenAI, aka ChatGPT, essentially. According to their mission statement, quote, OpenAI is a AI research and deployment company that develops advanced AI systems like ChatGPT with a mission to ensure that artificial general intelligence, AGI, benefits all of humanity. But OpenAI has a $200 million contract with the U.S. Department of Defense to develop Department of War to develop prototype AI for national security challenges, including administrative functions like healthcare and cyber defense, and frontline warfighting support. What they mean by warfighting support probably means like the same kind of AI targeting packages that Palantir is using in Gaza. This marks its first government partnership and was awarded through a $200 million contract that includes other AI companies like Google and Anthropic. OpenAI will also partner with defense tech company Anduril to help defend against drone attacks. So basically killing people and expanding the national security state. And that benefits all of humanity. And so it's still a private company, not even publicly traded. And that's why DeepSeek was such a huge blow to OpenAI and confidence in OpenAI. Because, it was basically free. It was made to be free. And in some ways, it's a lot better. So, yeah, it's not just this rare earths pipeline that they need the rare earths to build like the data centers and stuff to support this massive cloud infrastructure. But it's also that there's a rival now, and it's free because apparently the OpenAI business model was to get everybody like hooked onto ChatGPT and then make it like subscription based and paywall it. Well, why would I do that when I could just go over to DeepSeek? Anyways, there's a lot of problems going on with OpenAI right now. And again, it's because these roots are poisoned. All these cloud-based AI companies are all part of the U.S. AI boom or bubble, seen as our silver bullet against China. It has a poisoned foundation. So the U.S. economy is heavily invested in artificial intelligence, driven by massive private sector spending that has made AI a significant driver of current GDP growth. Like most of our GDP growth is just that, this AI bubble thing. Like the US leads the world in private AI investment. Companies are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into building colossal data centers and acquiring the necessary chips and equipment. Capital expenditures by these firms are expected to surpass $400 billion this year. So while private sector leads, the US government also invests significantly in AI research and development technologies, focusing on areas like national security, healthcare, and education. And the risks here of the heavy concentration of investments has led to concerns about a potential AI bubble and the economy's reliance on the technology's success. So questions remain about whether current investments will yield the expected long-term productivity gains in the broader economy, but OpenAI may be considered overvalued due to its massive operational costs, which are growing faster than its revenue, and evaluation that is being compared to a tech bubble, as I keep freaking repeating. The company's $500 billion valuation is based on future potential, but its current profitability is hindered by the immense and growing cost of computing power and infrastructure needed for AI development. OpenAI Compute, we're going to hear Sam Altman say this in a second, refers to the company's massive infrastructure and massive amounts of computing power needed to develop and run advanced AI models, which involves a combination of in-house hardware, rare earths, cloud services from partners like Microsoft and Amazon, and a strategic build-out of new data centers. It is essential for the company's mission and is the subject of a major long-term investment strategy, as demand for AI computing power is described as voracious. Here is Sam Altman admitting that if they don't have the materials or infrastructure to build the compute, they won't be able to meet their $1.4 trillion spend commitments in AI infrastructure.
Company with 13 billion in revenues make 1.4 trillion of spend commitments, you know, and you've heard the criticism,
First
Sam.
of all, we're doing well more revenue than that. Second of all, Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. I just enough. Like, you know, people are. I think there's a lot of people who would love to buy OpenAI shares. I don't think you would,
including myself, including myself.
People who talk with a lot of like breathless concern about our compute stuff or whatever that would be thrilled to buy shares. So I think we could sell, you know, your shares or anybody else's to some of the people who are making the most noise on Twitter, whatever, about this very quickly. We do plan for revenue to grow steeply. Revenue is growing steeply. We are taking a forward bet that it's going to continue to grow, and that not only will ChatGPT keep growing, but we will be able to become one of the important AI clouds, that our consumer device business will be a significant and important thing, that AI that can automate.
1 second. Sorry, guys. The spooky mouse just asked a really crazy question. Can't we just effing feed people with that money? God. Excuse me. Apparently, someone hasn't heard of the senseless religion known as maximizing shareholder value. Don't see how that fits into that, but I'm sure Jesus would agree with you. But we're not here for that.
Made science will create huge value. So, you know, there are not many times that I want to be a public company, but one of the rare times it's appealing is when those people are writing these ridiculous OpenAI is about to go out of business and, you know, whatever. I would love to tell them they could just short the stock, and I would love to see them get burned on that. But, you know, we carefully plan. We understand where the technology, where the capability is going to grow.
Here it comes. Here comes the big bomb.
Go and how the products we can build around that and the revenue we can generate. We might screw it up.
I think it's gone from might to overwhelmingly likely at this point, and here's why.
Like, this is the bet that we're making, and we're taking a risk along with that. A certain risk is if we don't have the compute, we will not be able to generate the revenue or make the models at this kind of scale.
If we don't have the compute, we will not be able to generate the revenue for our spending commitments, and this whole thing's going to go belly up. And just look at that guy's face. He's just like, How are you going to get the compute? Again, the compute is OpenAI's term for getting all of the infrastructure built And a lot of that is this rare earths, like the lithium and the coltan and, the tin and all this stuff that goes into these chips, which we have to send to China to get processed anyways. And then they send back because we don't have any industrial infrastructure to do it ourselves. We deindustrialized in the 80s to increase profit margins, just like we always do. And now we have nothing. And now we have to start a war. And I don't think there'll be boots on the ground. There's only 4,000 Marines. That's enough to establish a beachhead, maybe. But no, this is pat regime change operation. Like, we have decided MCM is going to go in there and she's going to open up all of their stuff and we're going to take it all. And, there is a black market for rare earths coming out of Venezuela. It's run by gangs, just like it is in certain parts of Africa through artisanal mining and stuff like that. But then we would take that over, just like we taken it, just like Glencore does in the Congo with, these really circuitous supply chains that aren't really fully disclosed to the SEC. So they file specialized disclosure reports, which basically say our downstream supply chain or like our upstream supply chain is so convoluted, we do our best, but hey, it's Africa. What are you going to do? It's going to be the same thing here in Venezuela. So, someone's just said, please stop saying the system is broken. That is false and keeps people brainwashed. The system is malicious and parasitic. I would say the system is working exactly not as it was designed to, because it's designed to just increase profits, blah, 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 and then not have any sort of popular revolution against it, or not degrade the material conditions of the working people to the place where they have to have some sort of popular revolution. But it always does, because that's the inherent contradiction of capitalism, which we're not going to get into. We're here talking about OpenAI. So it's not just about, establishing and maintaining the U.S.'s oil hegemony. It also has to do with this idea that we have put so much and leveraged so much of our economy into AI and speculative finance capital that if this thing goes belly up, what is really going to happen? Because when a AI bubble bursts, it refers to the theory that the current surge in AI related stock values is an unsustainable market bubble driven by hype and speculative investment rather than company fundamentals, similar to the dot-com bubble. This looks a lot like the dot-com bubble. And concerns are fueled by sky-high valuations for AI companies, like OpenAI valued at $500 billion. I'm not even sure if that's still the same valuation. That may have been from earlier, but $13 billion annual revenue. Woo. That's, yeah. I forget what the venture capital thing is, 5 by 15, but that's definitely not 5 by 15. But oh my God, it's been so long since I've been in that world. But massive investments in the sector and a circular flow of money between major AI players, which is artificially inflating stock prices. While the long-term potential of AI is considered significant, obviously, a lot of experts believe that if growth or profits don't meet inflated expectations, the bubble could burst, leading to a painful correction. So what does that mean when a financial bubble bursts? Well, asset prices crash, leading to significant financial losses. This is the important part for investors, and often triggering a recession with increased unemployment. They don't care so much about that, and decreased economic activity. They do care a little bit about that. The collapse can cause a cascade of debt deflation and financial panic as confidence erodes and people sell assets, which can have a wider and more severe impact depending on the size of the bubble and how much the debt was involved. There's a lot in this one, right, guys? So asset price collapse. The defining feature is a sudden and sharp drop in the price of the asset that was being overhauled. And again, here's the big one: investor losses. Investors who bought at the inflated peak can suffer large and sometimes permanent financial losses. So the capitalists were hoping to get access, to the Donbass in Ukraine, but that isn't going to happen. So Venezuela is a solid bet. Our economy is so leveraged in AI that we really don't have a choice from the imperial perspective. So we are going to gin up a regime change war. And it doesn't matter how compliant Maduro becomes, he'll never be as malleable as MCM, as I've mentioned before. And that's one of the reasons. I just kind of wanted to use, there's a lot of different reasons why this Venezuela war is happening. It's not just necessarily for resources. It's not just for, ideology of the freaking Guisuanos out of Miami who are constantly flocking to Mar-a-Lago, infiltrating like Trump's administration because they're brown nosers. It's also about regional domination, kicking China out. Like implicit behind all of this is that the U.S. doesn't have the same power projection as we used to. We're having to basically become more and more insular. Iran didn't work. We can no longer get away with doing that. Ukraine didn't work. So now we're basically siege mentalitying ourselves into a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And yes, we'll still, do our dirty work all over the world. But I think the Trump administration absolutely intends to kind of make this our fortress. So, have you ever had a conversation with a Venezuelan? Yes. Many. And we're actually, in fact, going to have some Venezuelan journalists on here very soon. We have to ask, which Venezuelans are you referring to? Because no one's a monolith, man. So all I am talking about this issue is the intention from the U.S. imperial perspective, driven by capital, using what we would call what we would call a color revolution, to try to install a democracy, but it's basically just to open up the country to exploitation from the only superpower that exists on this planet. So even if you don't like Maduro, if you don't recognize what the United States plan is for Venezuela, I don't know what to tell you, man. They're saying it out loud. Like the former commander of CENTCOM was basically just in the Atlantic Council salivating over what we can get from Venezuela and the surrounding countries in the quote unquote lithium triangle. It's about national security. You think the United States gives a F about you? They don't give an F about you. They talk about like women, life, freedom in Iran. They don't give a shit. They just want the one challenge to Israel gone, and they want to balkanize it so they can, exploit its mineral and oil wealth. Like that's it. So if you're like, oh, have you talking to Venezuelans? Yeah, man, I'm not here talking about the experience of Venezuelans. I am here as someone who used to be at the spear tip of imperialism, telling you how this is going to go down. And if you can't handle that, I don't know what to tell you, because this is the plan. They're literally saying it out loud, dude. You literally have one of the most evil, crazy people trying to install herself into power, calling on Netanyahu, who is charged with war crimes and genocide in Gaza, to come in and install her into power. But yeah, what do Venezuela? I'm not here to speak for Venezuelans. I'm a freaking white dude from Texas. I'm here to describe the imperial perspective. So it is it's a challenging thing to talk about. No one likes covering Syria. This is less controversial than Syria, honestly. It's actually really simple. I don't like states or governments, and I certainly don't simp for politicians. But if you think this will work out for the Venezuelan people and they will end up better off before or after a U.S. regime change operation, I don't think you've ever paid attention to U.S. history, especially in the post-World War II moment, at all. Like I can't help you then, And then also, sorry, I didn't mean to go on a rant. So, sorry, I'm trying to look at this question. If you guys have questions, you can ask them. We might go a little over today just because I want to talk about Mexico, and I didn't have a time to like put together any footage. But I would just like to say, and I wrote down some notes on my phone. I would just like to define terms because I do have a problem with some of these channels. They just take for granted that some people are getting into this. And I think I've already kind of defined it. But like some people don't know what color revolutions are. So color revolutions are a series of protests, often nonviolent, that occurred in post-Soviet states. Not that I'm a huge fan of those either. In other parts of the world in the early 21st century, aiming to overthrow autocratic regimes. This is just the definition, right, that I'm pulling up on the internet, and establish more democratic governments. These movements are frequently named after a specific color, such as the Rose Revolution in Georgia and Orange Revolution in Ukraine. While often initially successful, some have resulted in political instability and were seen by some countries as foreign-backed attempts to undermine their security. Yeah. And basically, democracy here is interchangeable for Western capital exploitation. This is how it is. So, I think that a lot of more disciplined, like Marxist-Leninists might not necessarily like agree with my view of some color revolutions, obviously, but like what's happening in Mexico with these protests, these Gen Z protests, definitely are, because I think I do have some videos. Like it was labeled kind of like Nepal as this kind of like grassroots Gen Z. The kids will not tolerate this anymore. But at the same time, these protests were happening in Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum has probably the highest approval rating in the world, one of the top 3. It's like almost 80%. And of course, crime and corruption exist in Mexico. They have had entrenched cartel narco-terrorism violence for decades. But she herself and her administration is not corrupt. And material conditions are improving. She's immensely popular. But apparently, for some reason, we're hearing all over the news that, there's massive protests. I think I have the video here somewhere. Sorry, guys. I came unprepared. It's my first day back in a long time after the flotilla. Yeah, apparently it's all this youth-led movement, which may have been true to some extent in Nepal, but here it's not so much. So I'm going to try to see if we have enough time to upload this one video. It was actually really instructive because there weren't really many Gen Z people there. They're old, right-wing, a lot of them evangelical Mexican citizens coming who sympathize with Trump, and we didn't see any young people. In fact, as I talked to some people in Mexico City, and their assertion to me was like one of the things is like at this protest, no Palestine flags. It's like, that's always in activism circles, seeing that like Palestine is the linchpin of everything. It's a huge red flag. Let me see just before we end here if we got some of the footage from this, because I might do a deep dive on this tomorrow on my own platform, but this is exactly who was at this protest. Damn it, I'm so out of touch with this interface. Video file, screen recording.
¿Serías Donald Trump, presidente de México, que es Claudia Sheinbaum?
Sí, 1000 veces sí.
Would you rather have Donald Trump as president of Mexico or Claudia Sheinbaum? She says Trump.
¿Y qué le parece sobre Donald Trump?
Que está haciendo un buen trabajo.
¿Y qué le parece sobre la militarización de los Estados Unidos?
Pues que también igual, si estuviera aquí como el país, tampoco no estaría bien.
Well, he has good things and other things that we are not.
What would you say some of the good things are?
Well, he protects the life. I mean, the newborn, okay?
Abortion.
He's against abortion, okay?
De Donald Trump. A mí me parece un buen presidente. A lo mejor no es lo mejor que hay. Sin embargo, si hubiera quedado
However, if it were Kamala,
yo creo que la situación sería peor porque Kamala
I think the situation would be worse because Kamala,
junto con Biden, son algo muy parecido a lo que es López Obrador. Y por eso se permitieron muchas cosas en Estados Unidos. La llegada de muchos emigrantes, muchos narcos.
Many immigrants were allowed under Biden into America. That's a crazy idea to have. So, yeah, and this is not the only video of journalists on the ground in Mexico City interviewing people from those protests. Yeah, so I think that's where we're at right now. I think, over the past 2 years, due to the genocide in Gaza and stuff like that, I think we're kind of starting to see the patterns. Yeah, and there comes a point in time where you just can't disregard what's happening. It's like freaking Valentina Adolf Eichmann from Venezuela, who lives in South Beach, is saying my country yearns for freedom. But then again, over 9 million Venezuelans have volunteered to defend their country under Maduro as part of the People's Militia. How many Americans would volunteer to go to war in Venezuela? It's not 9 million. The U.S., if we did go to war with Venezuela, which looks possible, more and more probable every day, because the capitalists can't afford not to at this point. Oil domination and our freaking overcommitment to AI, amongst a zillion other things. The need to keep China and Russia out of our sphere of influence now that we don't have the same power projection that we used to have. The most we could do is destroy their Air Force. The Gerald R. Ford could destroy the Venezuelan Air Force overnight. 90 F-18 Super Hornets. Not one has ever in history lost a dogfight. We could use naval guns to level most military installations. There's nothing they could do to stop it. Because the U.S. is really good at defeating non-near-peer conventional militaries like that. I don't know if that's a flex, because that doesn't mean you win the war. That means you just kill a bunch of people and break a bunch of shit. So what are you going to do about an insurgency, not even with 9 million, but even with 200,000? That's a freaking nightmare. And it's not going to work. All these plans are going to fail. The Trump administration is actively failing right now. They're mired in so much who blew who conspiracy. It's not an effective government. But we're going to keep on giving dying Roman Empire vibes and doing a bunch of crazy, wacky shit, just like the Third Reich did before it fell. And do I think the U.S. is going to collapse as rapidly as the Reich or take as long as the Roman Empire? No, but we're all on this ride together, and we have no mechanism or apparatus to stop what's happening right now, aside from mass mobilization, which won't happen. So if the president says at this point that we're going to go into a distance conflict with Venezuela, we are going to go into a distance conflict with Venezuela. So, women may be more free in Iran than the U.S. I wouldn't feel comfortable sending my kids to school in America for fear of school shootings. Not heard of any school shootings in Iran. I think I often marvel at the power of the Cold War propaganda. We're the only people that are free. We're the only ones who respect women's rights. What? Look at these Muslims doing child marriage. Dude, you can marry a freaking 13-year-old. Someone fact check me on this. It might be 12 in California with parental consent. So what? But yeah, I think our final question is, why doesn't America just stay home and leave other people alone? Why don't we actually act like a normal country? Well, I fail to see how that would enrich the 1% here in the United States. I don't know. Why didn't the British just stay home after they came out of feudalism? Why didn't the Portuguese just stay home and not go to India and start pillaging Goa, start the transatlantic slave trade? it's profitable. And this is what it's about. It's always about stolen land, stolen labor, and stolen resources. There are problems with other economic systems, a lot of problems with feudalism, but this is just how our economic system, which dominates our politics, functions. And that's why it's been kind of easy. Once you understand that, you don't have to be a freaking smart person or even a genius, or I should say, you don't even have to be a genius or even a particularly smart person to understand what decisions this government is going to make, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Domestic policy, we got some other issues that don't exist in a foreign policy context, like LGBTQ rights, basically stuff that doesn't really move the needle in terms of foreign policy. Because, we both seen, like with the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York, that both Republicans and the establishment Democrats, even like some progressive, quote unquote, progressive democratic socialists wouldn't even want to support him. And they all came together then, and they all come together for these foreign wars. We're going into Iraq 2.0 with Venezuela. Where's the democratic opposition? Why? One of the reasons Trump won was because he was anti-war and anti-interventionist. Everybody who knew Trump knew that was BS, but his supporters believed it. Why isn't the Democratic Party being like, if we actually want to win and get those independent voters who didn't like the genocide in Gaza, who didn't like Biden's, engagement or handling of Ukraine, why don't we get them over to us as the now founded anti-war party? But they won't do it because the Democratic Party is so heavily invested in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley needs hard raw materials in order to survive and win out against China. Not going to happen, but they're going to try. That we got to go to war. It was about oil. This one's also about oil, but now it's about AI. So, and it's about regional domination, a bunch of whole other stuff. So that's just how it works. And that is why, ode to John Turdell, that we can't be a normal country. We have to be an empire until it destroys us all. So anyways, y'all, here we go. We are back. Going to be doing once a week shows for the rest of the month. We'll be doing like a more heavily intensive Q&A. Sorry, I'm a bit rusty. I have been off for like 3 months, with the flotilla, and then I took a hiatus just for like mental health reasons, but we're good to go now. And once we get back into it, we're going to be doing interviews. We're going to be getting awesome guests on, and just going to take this insane timeline one step at a time. So hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next Monday. Cheers, y'all.